Right, because I'm a little bit worried about how well you guys are preparing for the test, which is coming up on March 1st. Remember? So hopefully you're following this review and trying to keep track of it. But just in case if you do not, let's quickly go over it and see if you know the answers to some of the questions we covered last time. So what are the 4 primary moral virtues according to Plato? What are these 4 virtues? I'll give extra credit if you can answer correctly. So let's see if somebody else can answer this question. What is the authority to rule based on in Plato's ideal society? Remember we talked about last time ideal society, his republic. So what's the authority to rule is based on? Oh, and by the way, if you on the video, if you can see it, the answer to the first question is temperance, self-discipline, courage, wisdom, and justice. Temperance and self-discipline is more or less the same thing. Courage, wisdom, and justice. That's the answer. So how about the authority? What's the authority based on? Anybody else? Is it money? Is it fame? Fairness. So they select the most fair person to rule the ideal republic. Is that what they do? We hope that the ideal rulers will be fair, but that's not exactly the correct answer. Wisdom is better, yeah. The best answer is intellectual merit. Intellectual merit. People who are most intellectually capable, the philosophers, but they are the ones who are, of course, the wise ones. Yeah, so opinion, that is good answer. Okay, and let's try one more. What are the 3 types of people in Plato's ideal society? Again, 1 per person, so Biniam and Melissa got their extra credit if anybody else wants to answer this one. 3 types of people. What are the 3 types of people? Again, it may get a little confusing sometimes because it's translated differently in the book and in some other sources, so I'm not going to be too tough about that, okay, well, the thing with it is, it's more or less correct, but note that guardians and rulers, guardians include rulers. So the better answer is auxiliaries. Remember on the last time when we talked about it on a lecture, that's how we called it. Auxiliaries and rulers. So auxiliaries and proper guardians. The proper guardians would be the rulers. Producers, auxiliaries, and proper guardians. Okay, but that is more or less correct. Because remember also that on the test you'll have multiple choice, right? So you only have to pick one. But there will be a particular way they are called. So it's best not to be confused about it. Anyway, okay, I think that's all for now. Let's talk about metaphysics and epistemology, the heart of Plato's philosophy, which actually is pretty cool. First of all, let's also remember going back to Socrates and how specifically Plato will be different. What did Socrates try to do? What was he trying to do? He was wandering around Athens, right? And doing what? Sometimes students think that he was just bugging people for no good reason, but that obviously is not correct. He had a purpose. He was trying to do something specific. Well, what the method is how he was doing, but what he was actually doing is looking for definitions. Remember, he was asking them, for example, what is courage and what is beauty? This is specifically what he was doing. So he would find people who are hopefully experts on it, and sometimes not even experts, but more often than not that will be people who are considered experts in a particular field, and ask them those questions. He was looking for these definitions and doing it, yes, dialectical method, but that's what dialectical method is. question and answer. He would ask them, and they would answer, and he would ask them more, and they would answer again, and so they were kind of going on about it. Justice is, yes, one of them. But here's the important question. Did he find it? Well, kind of, but remember the word aporia, which I mentioned last time. Most of these early dialogues end in aporia, and this is, in fact, dead end. So they actually were not really finding them. They did kind of become more aware of the fact that they don't know it, right? So that was kind of the already progress, because if somebody thinks he knows something but he is actually delusional, that's much worse than if somebody realizes he doesn't know it. That is progress. That is better. Nonetheless, they would not reach these definitions, because I don't even know if Socrates ever meant to reach them. He was kind of trying to do that, but whether or not he was successful, well, we don't know. However, Plato moves on from that. This is where Plato is different from Socrates. So let's look at Plato. Now, why is it important? Well, this is the kind of how you can break it down very easily. Say justice. Either justice is something real and objective, or it's a mere word. Now, if second alternative is true, then our moral judgments have no value. Right? We can't really say somebody is just or not just if there's no such thing as justice. So, for example, how can we ever decide whether there's a moral difference between Hitler and, say, Mother Teresa? If there's no such thing as justice, we really can't. We can just say, well, we don't like what Hitler was doing, and we like what Mother Teresa was doing, but somebody else can tell you, you know what? No, I'm actually okay with what Hitler was doing. I don't like what Mother Teresa is doing. And then, according to Protagoras, remember, as man is a measure of all things, you would have to say, okay, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, but isn't there something wrong about that? Like, somebody tells you Hitler was right, wouldn't you say there's something wrong about that opinion? There's definitely a problem there. So that's what Socrates was trying to also say. Like, even though we may not know what justice is, but clearly he would say there has to be such thing. There has to be some sort of moral standard we can judge. Because there's clearly a difference between Hitler and Mother Teresa. And you have to be really some kind of psychopath to say that there isn't. Now, so if justice is something real and objective now, can it be physical or non-physical? Can there be such physical object as justice? Like, you walk down the street and there it is, justice, right there on the road. So you can just pick it up and measure stuff against it. No, clearly not. So it has to be non-physical. So the conclusion is, it has to be real, it has to be objective, and it has to be non-physical. So this is where Plato decided to kind of introduce his theory. One of the things is he's saying it has to do with the soul rather than with the body, because the body is something physical, but the soul is not, right? The soul is something, well, we can't say what exactly it is, but it seems non-physical. So this is a quote from the work which is considered kind of transitional towards his own theory, where he already kind of departs from Socrates and comes up with his own stuff. It is kind of long, but I did want to tell you, to read it to you. So he says, whenever the soul additionally uses the body for considering something, whether through seeing or through hearing or through some other sense, for to consider something through the body is to do so through the sense perception. At those times, it is dragged by the body into things that never stay in the same state. And the soul itself wanders and is disturbed and giddy as if drunk, because the things it is grasping have the same kind of instability. So what he's saying is, when you hear things, when you see things, they constantly change. It's kind of hard to get your grasp about it. That's why, like, say you have a disagreement about whether a particular object is there or not. Well, by the time you decide that, the object may be gone. It's already moved. So it becomes very difficult. But whenever the soul considers alone by itself, it gets away into that which is pure, always in existence, and immortal, and which stays in the same condition. The soul, because it is akin to this, always comes to be with it whenever alone by itself and able to do so. The soul is then at rest from wandering, and in relation to those entities stays always in the same state and condition, because the things it is grasping have the same kind of stability. This state of the soul is called wisdom. So what he basically is saying is that physical things which our body senses through the senses, which you can hear or see or touch, they change all the time. Just like Heraclitus said, remember? It changes. It constantly changes. But the things which have to do with the soul, they actually do not change. Why? Because they are eternal. So remember, Heraclitus said everything changes, and then Parmenides said nothing changes because the reality itself cannot change. So this is kind of a duality which is created when you take either one of these positions. If you say things change, then you can't really say that something is stable. If you say things are stable, then how do you explain change? This is what is known as metaphysical monism. Monism from mono, one thing. Now Plato introduces metaphysical dualism. He actually says both of this is true. He says there are two worlds. There is a world of unchanging intelligible forms, as he calls it. And there is a world of constant flux, which is physical world. Two different worlds, one of them constantly changing, the other one is eternal and never changes. The world of flux is the physical world, and we encounter it in sense experience. It consists of matter. Matter by itself makes everything change. You can never have real knowledge of it because it just flows like that river Heraclitus was talking about. You cannot step into it twice. Before you know it, it's already different. Now, what can you know? This eternal reality, the unchanging reality which our souls only have access to. Okay, so to understand what forms are, take a look at this picture. What is common between all these animals? Well, what are these animals? They are dogs, but what's common among them? What is that which makes them dogs? Pets. So any pet is a dog? Fur, four legs, nose. Well, canine characteristics, what are those canine characteristics? If you just say fur, four legs, and nose, well, that would imply that if you have a dog with only 3 legs, it's no longer a dog. Bark. So if they don't bark, they're not dogs. Not all dogs bark. I know it's difficult. That's exactly the problem Plato was dealing with too. It's like this with almost anything, really. Like, how do you define a human being? How do you define a dog or a cat? That again, remember, this is essentially what Socrates was doing too, except he was interested in more things like beauty or justice, but nonetheless, even things such as a dog. What is a dog? It seems like you know what the dog is, but to actually say what it is, because like color can be different, fur can be different, bark, non-bark, legs, all these physical characteristics seems to be very different, and yet there is such thing as the dog. Okay, how about this? What is common between these figures? Shapes. Well, okay, but do they look like triangles to you? Yeah, they have no corners, so they are more or less circles, right? They are different circles. Some of them are more circlish than others, right? So, for example, this one is kind of a circle, but not really. This one is more of a circle, but there's still a bit of a problem. Now, how about this one? This one is pretty good, huh? Yeah, a bit like potato, but it's kind of like circle, but very bad circle. If you try to draw a circle, but your hand is really like unsteady, this is what you would probably create. Well, yeah, like idea again is there should be such thing as the circle. And how do you define what circle is? Same thing as with the dog. We all kind of have an idea what circle is, but it's kind of difficult to put your finger in it. No doubt that this is more of a circle than this. Don't you see that? This is what we would say kind of really is a circle, but is it really a circle? Well, if you kind of look at it very closely, you will see that the edges are not perfect there. The edges are still like a little bit. So it's not really an ideal circle, but it's better, more of a circle than the other ones. Okay, so now we're kind of getting towards this idea of universals. Universals and particulars which Plato introduced. He was saying that there is such thing as universal, something corresponding to each common name that consists of the essential common properties. So, for example, universal of circularity, that would be what they called circularity itself. So that's kind of like an ideal circle. Ideal circle. Every time you see something which is kind of circlish, you compare it to that ideal. And the closer it is to the ideal, the more of a circle it is. Similarly, there is universal of justice. So how do you know what justice is? You compare the situation you encounter with this ideal. The ideal of justice. Same with universal of beauty. If you look at something, you say, wow, it is beautiful. And that other thing, it is ugly. And that third thing, well, it's a little bit beautiful, but not as beautiful as the first thing. What are you doing? You're comparing it to beauty itself. So note that this is essentially what Socrates was doing, except he did not really call it that. But Plato calls it that, and he says that everything you encounter in physical world are particulars. Particulars are just instances of that universal. But universal, he called it two Greek words, eidos or idea. Idea is where we today derive the word idea from. In philosophy, we typically translate it as forms. Eidos is actually form or shape in Greek. So it's slightly a better word than idea. Why? Because when you say idea, you actually think it's in your head, right? Note that this is not in your head. This is an ultimate reality, which is somewhere, but not in this world. This is what forms are. How do we know them if they are not in this world? How can we ever know what is this ideal dog to which we compare all these pictures? Or the ideal circle? Well, he had a pretty good answer. In another dialogue called Mano, he's saying, we both know and don't know universal forms. We know them because they are imprinted on the soul. We have innate knowledge of them. We forgot this knowledge So it needs to be rediscovered through recollection, dialectical questioning. So what he is saying there is that our soul is acquainted with all these forms from some sort of past existence. And when we are born, we actually do not remember that, but we can recall it through dialectical questioning. So every time you learn something, that is this type of recollection. It's already there, it just needs to be rediscovered, kind of brought back. Now, note that obviously that means the soul is immortal. And this is, remember, Pythagoreans were saying that first. And actually Plato probably picked it up from Pythagoreans, this idea that the soul is immortal. Another good quote: "It is true, we must presumably have learned in some previous time what we recollect now. And that would be impossible if our soul did not exist somewhere before it was born in human form." So in this way too, the soul seemed to be something immortal. That is one of the ways he actually proves the immortality of the soul. He's saying clearly we must have lived before. That's how we know all these things. So do you think this is a good argument for immortality of the soul? What do you guys think? Let's do a poll. How about we do a poll? Yes and no. Immortality of the soul. Is this a good argument for immortality of the soul? Right. So 13 people took part in this poll. 9 people think it's a good one. 4 people don't think so. So why, people who don't think it's a good argument, why don't you think it's a good argument? Okay, I say that if the soul tries to remember everything it learned in a past life, shouldn't we know everything of we are immortal? Not necessarily, you may have forgotten that too. Note that it just recollects as a result of dialectical reasoning, right? So you do forget this stuff. When you're born, you don't remember it anymore. Actually, in Republic, Plato describes the whole thing. He says that there was this guy who actually at one point died and thought he died, but he didn't. However, he did make the journey and then was kicked back to our life. What he saw there was this: when the souls go to it's not like the paradise or hell. It's like that place where all the past afterlife souls collect. They are being judged by how well did they live and divided into the ones who are bad people and good people, kind of heaven and hell type thing. And then the bad people have to spend a very long time suffering, thousands of years. And the better you did in your life, the more you are actually able to enjoy there. And it also, interestingly enough, depending on how well you lived your life, some of the souls don't have to come back. And those are the ones which have been rewarded the most, because life is suffering, right? So to bring back to life for the soul just means that it didn't do a good job first time. So the ones which actually did relatively good but not that good come back to try to do better next time. And they are given a choice of who they will be born. However, this choice is kind of like, first come, first serve. So certain people can pick certain lives, and then the ones after them pick whatever is left. And then they are born again as whatever they have chosen. Be it, a tyrant or musician or whatever. However, they forget everything. The moment they are born, they don't remember anything about this choice being made and what they saw there. So he does kind of has this interesting explanation about how it works. Anyway, I think a good argument needs some kind of reasoning or proof or something substantial to support it. Well, note that he kind of does have reasoning here he explains it by saying that clearly there are certain things which we must somehow know, but how do we know them? This is actually a big question in philosophy throughout, and we will see how it was approached later, closer to our time. But the question is this: do we have any kind of ideas which are already there when we are born? How can we learn everything? Shouldn't there be at least some sort of stuff there? To compare to the computer, like a good comparison would be, shouldn't there be already at least a software of some kind in our brain? How can we learn all these things throughout our life if we don't have anything to grab onto? If you have a computer without software, is it going to work? No, you need to actually have it there. But how is it there? Now we can, again, scientifically say, well, there's DNA, and DNA has all these characteristics. Well, what the hell is DNA? Where did it come from? Science doesn't really answer this question. It's process of natural selection and so on, but how can you take bunch of stones and sand and then turn them into DNA? That science doesn't know. Anyway, so what are the relations between particulars, each instance we see in this world, and forms? Forms are the cause of the existence of particulars. They are kind of like prototypes. Physical objects and concepts resemble or imitate their forms or participate in them. Well, how it works exactly, scholars are in disagreement about, because in Plato himself there are different explanations. He probably did change his mind throughout his own life, so different dialogues give slightly different versions, and which one is the latest one he had before he died. It's again hard to say because we don't know exactly when each dialogue was written. We have some ideas about which ones are early, which ones are late, but we don't know for a fact. It's not like they have a date on them or something, right? So for this reason, there's disagreement, but in general, if you read his work, it is clear that he sees those forms as some sort of ideals from which we can somehow derive everything we see around us. Now, again, that would be an example. Circularity. This is very low level of participation, he would say, in the circle, in ideal circle. So suppose there is ideal circle somewhere. Like, it's not in our mind, and it's not in this world, but somewhere there is ideal circle. So this one participates the least. This one participates more in that ideal circle. This one participates the most, but it still is just a copy of that ideal circle, which is somewhere out there. The way I draw it is probably even worse than this one, but nonetheless, you got the picture. So ideal circle is something non-physical. So now in the Republic, he actually gets to that point. Note it's closely connected to everything we did last time. He actually explains it and connects it all. One of the important parts of it, he is talking what he calls a divided line. A divided line is, he says, something like this. You can draw it to try to understand how do we know things in reality. And it's unevenly divided because parts are not equal. On the bottom there's imagination. He's saying imagination is actually the lowest level. You can imagine whatever you want. It's just a wild fantasy of some sort. Now, slightly better way to know things is the belief. However, belief is not that good either. Why? Well, you can be wrong. It lacks justification. Now, this is why it's uneven, because note that these two are not nearly as large as these two. These two are more important. Thought. Thought, dianoia in Greek, that's much higher level. And then the highest level is understanding. Now, how are they specifically divided? So, knowledge would only be thinking and understanding, but imagination and belief are types of opinion. So this bottom part, that's opinion. that part is something which is not very good. It's not a good way to know things. Only these two are truly ways we can know things. And based on that, he kind of explains you have 4 levels of reality. A level. A level is the lowest one. So this is like, again, the very bottom of this line, right here, right? That imagination level. Now, on the A level, you have these wild fantasies. He's saying in the category of the scene, the first section is images, by which I mean the first place shadows, second place reflections in water, any dense, smooth, shiny surfaces. So kind of like reflection of reality rather than reality itself. Now the next level up, slightly better one, the level of common belief or judgment, that would be something which we have about physical world. Note that it is closely connected to the world around us. He's saying second section is what the first one is the image of. Animals we see every day, the entire plant world, the whole class of human artifacts. So, for example, when you see a pan, that would be this second level. Any object, particular object, is on that level. But you have to go higher up to reach forms. So sea level, the level of thought, dhyana, that is when you start getting knowledge. This is not forms themselves yet, but the images of the forms. Then if you go even higher, the highest level, noesis, that is where you have true knowledge, rational thought. Now, he spends quite a bit of time explaining it, and he says all of this reaches its climax in the form of the good. The form of the good is the ultimate form which creates the entire reality. Okay, there is a better way to explain all that also with Allegory of the Cave. Again, if you read the chapter, you probably already know a little bit about it, but let's talk about it. So Allegory of the Cave is his way to explain his theory with a myth, kind of a myth, but the one which helps you to understand what he is talking about. And remember, metaphysics and epistemology, again, metaphysics is the theory of what is real, epistemology is the theory of how do we know it. So both of them kind of play a role there. So what is he saying in the Allegory of the Cave? He's saying, imagine a cave, this is kind of a representation, one of the versions, with prisoners. This is the prisoner, locked in chains, sitting there with his back towards this kind of a wall. He is locked so in such a way that he can only, he or she, see in front of them, the wall in front of them. Now, behind the wall there are other people. And by the way, we don't know who these people are. And behind those people there is some sort of light, source of light. These people are carrying cutouts of various things, such as horses, dogs, and whatever else. So the way light goes, there's a shadow on the wall. The prisoners can only see those shadows. That's all they can see. All their life they look at the shadows and they try to figure out what is it and how is it going to move. Now, he also says there actually sometimes a way to get out of this. One of the prisoners can break out from the chains and go outside the cave, all the way outside the cave. And if he does that, he will see the sun. The actual sun, which is the good. This is where all the goodness comes from the sun. The real light, the real knowledge is the sun. Also there he would see real animals and everything real, which of course is not what the prisoners see. The prisoners only see shadows of that. Okay, he can come back sometimes and tell these prisoners about what he saw. But what do you think will happen if he does? Well, maybe not killed, but yeah, that's one possibility. Why? Not only they won't believe him for sure, they would also be mad at him because he's trying to confuse them, right? He's trying to tell them something which they don't want to believe. They are so cozy, sitting there in their stupid cave, looking at those stupid shadows and thinking that's entire reality, that any story about the sun, about the different reality, will not be welcome. They will tell him that he is damaged by this entire experience, that he is now mentally ill, that he is not a good person. Note that this is very, very close to the story of Socrates. This is what Socrates is. Socrates is the person who came out of the cave, who saw the reality. And in fact, any philosopher is a person who actually comes out of the cave and sees the sun and sees the reality, and then his job is to come back and to explain it. But of course he can be killed, and this is exactly what happened to Socrates. Why? Because majority of people don't want to know it. They are enjoying the shadows. They think the shadows, which they spend their entire life trying to figure out, is the whole reality. So that's what most people do. They confuse those shadows for reality itself. And this is again going back to this divided line. This is how he explains this whole thing. So how do we know things? What is the slowest level? Level of imagination. Those are the shadows on the wall. Perception, what we think perception is, the objects which we see around us, are only marginally better. They're probably those cutouts which people are holding, right? The only way to get to real understanding and reasoning is to get out of the cave and to be familiar with the forms themselves. So the levels of reality are again matching this. So on the bottom you have all these images, optical illusions, appearances, which maybe you see in your dreams, stuff like that. Slightly higher level, sensible objects, tables, chairs, living creatures, what you think the real life is. But those are not real things. The real things are forms. So you can see lower forms, mathematical objects, forms of ordinary objects, stuff like that, and the higher forms, which is ultimately the form of the good, the sun. So this is the stuff you would see if you got out of the cave. You have to get out of the cave to see them. This is being. Whereas the stuff which we see in real life and what we think real life is becoming. That is what is constantly changing. Today it's a dog and tomorrow what? It dies and then it's just a pile of flesh. Today it's the chair and tomorrow it's in the garbage and then it just becomes garbage. Everything changes. The only thing which doesn't change, the real being, is this reality of the forms. So the good again is the ultimate source of knowledge and reality. He sometimes refers to it as the sun, sometimes as the good. It is the source of being and reality of all things, and like the sun enables us to see the truth. Because the truth is, again, truth does not change. The truth is not relative. The truth is what is outside the cave. You have to get out of the cave to know the truth. Okay, so let's discuss this a little bit. Why do you suppose Socrates compares us to prisoners? To what degree is it even accurate? Is there anything here that you find appealing? Like what? What would be beyond what we know? So let's even look at the last time. Remember what we talked about last time? Because like I said, it's ultimately related. Justice. What is the ideal society? Now, what is the ideal society? Who is supposed to rule it? Remember who are the kings in his ideal republic? Well, we do sometimes question why is something the way it is, but that is what philosophy is, right? If you are a philosopher, that's what you do. You are wondering about things, what's the ultimate purpose in life? Not many people actually ask this question, or at least in a serious way. We all live within our reality. Anyone that challenges our personal concept of reality will be met with resistance. Yes, that's for sure. And one important thing there again is, what is ultimately important? Because note that why is he putting all the producers on the bottom of this ladder? Why are producers are not rulers? What are they caring about? Physical things, remember? Money, prestige, pleasures. But even though he does not reject pleasures, he's saying, of course, human beings should have pleasures. What kind of pleasures do you think are important according to Plato? Would he consider a tasty meal a worthy pleasure? No, probably not. He would say that's a bodily pleasure. It is something which is fleeting. It's here now and gone to next moment, so it gives you more suffering than anything, because then you want more of it. But what would be the worthy pleasures, you think? Such as? Any examples? Well, knowledge is the ultimate one, for sure. Knowledge is the ultimate pleasure, but anything else? Money? No, definitely not money. Money, absolutely not. He would say money is one of those physical things which you can chase but you can never grasp. It's just constantly changing. That's this illusion you have. Why is it an illusion? Can you ever have enough money? Can there be a moment when you say, okay, I have so much money now I don't need any more? Well, I mean, it is arguable whether or not that had anything to do with it, but nonetheless, that is his theory. He is by far not the only one who thinks this way, and many people who agree with him are not rich. So that, from that point of view, I think that even though you can bring it against Plato himself and say, easy for you to say you're rich, but many people who are poor agree with that. But what are the pleasures? Well, let me give you a few examples which actually he himself gives. Music. Music, he would say, is another one of those pleasures, even though it's sensual pleasure, but it does something for your soul. What else? Art. Beautiful paintings, beautiful creations of art. Why? Because they talk to your soul. They connect to your soul rather than to your senses. And you don't have to buy them, right? Even though you can say, oh, well, I could buy a Picasso or whatever works of art. You don't have to. Why do you need to buy it in order to enjoy it? You don't at all. You can go to a museum for free and look at it, and that's enough. Or you can even look at it on illustration of some sort. And it still gives you just as much as to the person who paid $20 million and put it on his wall. Because he doesn't have any more than you from that point of view. Yeah, he can sell it eventually, but that's about it. So note that the fact that he has $20 million to buy it doesn't give him any advantage over you, really, in that sense. That is not something he can buy. So this is the kind of pleasures he would say are worthy pleasures. This is the knowledge. Same thing with knowledge. Like, you may say, well, I have to pay to take classes. Well, it's true, but in the same time, nobody's stopping you from just, reading stuff for yourself in your spare time, philosophy or whatever else. And even if it may not be completely free, but it's not that expensive. You can borrow a book from a library and have it for free for a month and read it, and that doesn't cost anything. Anyway, so this is essentially what he thinks the ultimate reality is. So why do these people come back? That's actually one of the questions he raises there too. Like, wouldn't they want to stay there in that real world with the sun? Why do they come back? No, I don't think it scares them. if it was scaring them, they'd probably not be philosophers. That definitely is not how Plato himself explains it. Yeah, to shed light, to share it with others, because they feel it like their duty. He raises this question about philosopher kings when he says that, well, but many people think that philosophers don't make very good rulers. And one of the reasons is they don't even want to be rulers. If you truly are a philosopher, if you don't care about power, why should you rule? So this is how he answers this. He says, well, one benefit you get from that is you don't actually want bad people to rule you. So you have to do it yourself. Even if you are, as philosopher, not after power, you have a duty. And that is your duty, to be a ruler, to actually carry this burden, even though you don't want it. And he says that people who don't want it are actually the best rulers. Because people who are after power, they are not good rulers. They are not wise. They will be just trying to get benefit for themselves. So remember again, we talked about a while back this shepherd. This example of a shepherd. Thrasymachus was saying that people are sheep and the ruler is like a shepherd, so essentially he will eat them. So he's doing things as a ruler to make sure that everything to his benefit. But Socrates in the Republic disagrees with that and says, no, to that instance he is not a good ruler. And he actually compares that to a medical doctor. Medical doctor, he's saying, how about medical doctor? Would you say medical doctor should concentrate on the money he gets or on his patients? Is he working to enrich himself, or is he working to make people healthy? Patients, obviously. He's saying he will never be a true doctor if all he is after is money. Money comes second. Obviously, you need money if you want to survive in this world. But a good doctor is not determined by how much money he is making. He is determined by how well is he taking care of his patients. Same thing with a good ruler. He's saying good ruler should take care of people of his country. And that's how he is determined. He's not determined by how much prestige or power he has, or she. Well, at the time it was mostly a he, but I guess occasionally it could have been a she too. So yeah, that's how he says we determine a good ruler. And of course not all rulers are like this, but philosophers ideally should be like this. Do you think Socrates eventually proves his point that justice is better than injustice? So let's look back at what we were talking about. What is justice in that society, in this ideal republic? Athens law, like any Athens law, it's just justice. As soon as it's passed as a law, it is justice. So if there's a law to eat babies, that would be a just law? No, the justice is something, he says, fundamentally real. It's not up to us to decide what is just. That's the point there. We can't as human beings just gather and decide that it is just to eat babies, because it is not just to eat babies. But in the Republic, what was justice again? Remember, he's making this comparison with the soul. What he's saying is justice in the soul. So the justice in the soul, again, remember the components of the soul. Wisdom, courage, temperance, they should all be in the correct balance. And when they are, that's justice. Similarly, in a society, it should be in the correct balance. Now, what is the correct balance in the society? When he starts talking about it, it's immediately comes up the way most people actually even think about it. Everyone should get what they deserve, right? Isn't it how people usually look at it? But then the next question becomes, well, what do they deserve? And his answer actually is that, well, they deserve different things. What we deserve depends on what kind of people we are. And that is justice. So justice in that sense is that producers should do what producers do, and guardians should do what guardians do, and philosophers should do what philosophers do. So he's not saying everyone should get equal share, because people are fundamentally unequal. But he's saying everyone should get a share which he or she deserves. Note that he goes into great length to make sure that his republic is fair, because he wants everyone to have an equal chance. That's the biggest problem. He wants all these babies to be taken away from their parents and gathered together into some sort of camp. Why? Because they should have equal chance at success. If somebody is a good philosopher in the future, he or she should be a philosopher. Even she. Remember, he says even women should have an equal shot at it. Independent of their parents. So at their parents being themselves, for example, rulers or billionaires or whatever, would not influence the fact that their children have better chance than everybody else. But once you get this, once you start out like that, then it all is depending on what you deserve. Because he's not saying everybody should get exactly the same amount. So note that this is also behind this idea of the just society, which eventually became idea of communism. Communism or socialism or whatever else you may call it. Now when we get to Marx, we'll talk more about it. But Marx actually read the Republic. And that is one of the reasons why he even came up with this idea. So idea is again of the just society where everyone has equal chance to succeed, regardless of their birth, regardless of who their parents are. It doesn't mean that everybody has exactly the same amount of everything, because that would be stupid, right? People who work harder should have more. Although in Marx that the ideal society, which is communism, is even better than that, when in fact everybody kind of can have as much as they want, essentially. But we will talk about it later. So for Plato, that's not the case. For Plato, people do actually have different requirements based on how much they deserve. But nonetheless, he is trying to make sure that they have an equal shot at it. But the game is not skewed, because the way society usually works is, people when they are born in particular families already kind of have the game somewhat either in their favor or against them. And that's not fair. That's not just. Because, it's harder for somebody, again, who was born in a ghetto to become a president than it is for somebody whose daddy is one of the richest people in this country. So without, making any kind of political comparisons, you can hopefully see what I mean. Naturally, these people, even though they may be equally qualified, or maybe even the one who is born in a ghetto is more capable, but just because he's born in a ghetto or she, they don't have equal chance of becoming a president as somebody who is born into one of the wealthiest families. And that is unjust. That's what injustice is. Anyway, so Plato was enormously influential. And like I said, we will see, it's one of the reasons why we have to start with Plato, Aristotle, and all this Greek philosophy, is because it literally determines the entire course of our society. These ideas were coming back and back and back again. They are behind Christianity. Hopefully you guys already can see that. When Christianity was forming by the church fathers, they actually were reading Plato and there's actually some Neoplatonists who at the time were working within Platonic tradition, which influenced them greatly. So when we talk a little bit about St. Augustine, you will see how that influenced St. Augustine and so on. So Christianity was based on these ideas, and you hopefully can see how. Then, of course, Catholic faith in particular, there is a lot connected to Aristotle. So next week when we talk about Aristotle, you will see how that is connected. Aristotle also influenced science. The way we do science today is very closely connected to Aristotle. Logic, the rules of logic, what Philosophy 102 teaches, the critical thinking classes, that is Aristotle. So Plato and Aristotle are not on that painting in the Sistine Chapel for just purposes of creating a beautiful picture. They are there because they are fundamental to our understanding of this society. In fact, that one of the modern philosophers, Alfred North Whitehead, very pointedly said that the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. So even though it is exaggeration, but there is a point to that. Plato is one of the first ones. He actually has started this entire conversation. Everybody who writes after Plato has to react to him. As we will see next week, Aristotle in particular was a student of Plato. Everything Aristotle did was influenced by Plato. Plato was his teacher. So even though he disagrees with Plato on many questions, nonetheless he is kind of this one first big footnote to Plato, and then everybody else kind of starts writing after that. Why don't we say that about the philosophers we talked about before? Well, we hardly have much of their ideas, whereas with Plato we actually have this huge body of his work. So even though we know a little bit about Heraclitus and Parmenides and so on, we don't know enough to be able to even figure out their exact views. Socrates himself didn't even write anything. So again, remember, Socratic problem is we don't know exactly what to attribute to Socrates and what exactly is it Plato. But Plato, we know his work. We can read it today. You can take his book and read it. So that's why he is so influential. Now, well, this is just some more stuff about here. And again, the Aristotle and the way he disagreed with Plato, as we will see next week, actually provided for this kind of an opposition to this view. You may say Aristotle is a lot more scientific. So remember the Sistine Chapel picture which we saw last time. Plato was pointing upwards towards the sky. Where did Aristotle point? Down towards the earth. So he is more grounded. He is more of like scientific. This is the first attempt at like creation of actual science. We will talk about it. Unfortunately, we only have one discussion next week, because remember, actually, in case if you forgot, Monday is actually holiday. We're not meeting on Monday. I will make a video for this part of Aristotle, because I think that we can't possibly cover him in one lecture only, but nonetheless we will not meet. I will just put it up online so you can watch it. And when we meet on Wednesday, that will be next time we meet after today, we will discuss Aristotle's ethics, his moral theory, because it is closely connected to his metaphysics. Nonetheless, metaphysics also very important. All this stuff is very important, and it will help us understand philosophy the way it is today. If you want to understand anything about today's philosophy, you have to go back to all these ancient Greek ideas. Otherwise, it's not possible. So for next week, make sure you read, first of all, do the quiz and homework for chapter 5, which is due February 14th. Wow, that's actually Valentine's Day, isn't it? But yes, that's when we have it due. It's Sunday. Make sure that you do it by then. You don't have to do it on a Valentine's Day, but do it ahead of time. And read chapter 6. Definitely make sure you read it by Wednesday, when we next meet. It is about Aristotle. Read those chapters. They will help you understand it too. Don't just rely on lectures, and make sure you watch actual lectures. I can see that there's not that many people who are watching them. Well, you guys of course are meeting live, so for those of you who sit through this live session, you don't have to rewatch it, but I know there is like 120 people in 4 other sections, and out of them only about 30 or 40 regularly watch this stuff. So not for your benefit, but for their benefit, because I will put it up again later as a recording. They should watch it. Otherwise, the test is coming on March 1st, and a lot of people will fail it, especially if you do not pay attention. It's not going to be enough to pass this class just to do the homework and the quizzes. That's only like 25%. You have to be prepared for the tests. Okay, so like I said, we will meet again next Wednesday, February 17th. Not on Monday. Are there any questions? Anything you guys want to clarify? Anything not clear about the class or whatever else? No? Nobody has anything else? So, just to look at the other questions for the exam. So, how did Plato believe we become aware of innate knowledge? Hopefully you can answer it now. How did he believe we become aware of it? We just talked about it. Imagine it's a question on the exam. You have to know it. How do we do it? Recollection. Exactly. Through recollection. That is the correct answer. Now, what terms describe the 4 levels on Plato's divided line? Remember, we're not just talking about it for entertainment purposes. It might be on, not all of these questions will be on the test, but most of them. So if I'm concentrating on this, you should know it. Well, the words there were thinking, reasoning, belief, and images or illusions. So this is the 4 levels. Okay, now what else is here? What is the ultimate source of knowledge and reality? The good. Remember, the good. The good is the ultimate source. The good or the sun. Do not confuse it with God. Even though the idea of God later will be connected to this, but it's not the way Plato describes it. He just calls it the good. And anytime you want to know if something is good or bad, you kind of compare it to this form of the good. Form of the good is the ultimate form. Okay, what does the world outside the cave represent? The realm of the forms, or the true realities. The realm of the forms. This is where the forms are, right? Because, like I said, the good is the ultimate form, but all the other stuff, like these real animals, these real triangles, real circles, and so on, they are outside the cave in this world. So this is the answer to this question. Okay, I guess that's it. That's all the questions. We did the first part in the beginning, so next comes Aristotle. Alright, so this is all for today. Any more questions? Thank you very much. I'll see you next Wednesday. Make sure watch the videos because they will have more of this answers you need for the exam, and everything you need to know will be in the videos. The book, just a little bit, but mostly the videos and the lectures. Okay, so that's it for today then. We can, I guess, finish a little bit earlier. Have a great long weekend, guys, and I will see you